then I think he said we will be thinking like these top producers, and that's what we all trying to be. You ain't trying to be what they call it, a whip producer. You ain't trying to be a so-so producer. We want to be top producers. You know, regardless of if you could outsell a Stephanie Bataco or Mel Wilson, you still want to be a top producer, whatever level you can get to what you consider being top. All right, Mel, I'm done, man. That's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Rodney. Welcome back. I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
We know where she's at. Much around.
How are you?
I'm blessed and highly favored. Thank you.
Fine.
So you got a green book. Stand out. Everybody got to sign. Okay, I just wanted to take a brief survey to find out how many of you really are paying attention to what's going on in our industry. I'm just going to do a quick survey around the room and just get a sense of how long you've been in the business, and tell me if you've been in it full-time, part-time. So just real quick.
33 and a half years, mostly full-time.
Okay.
5 months and pretty close to full-time.
Okay.
20 years, full time.
Okay.
I've been 23 years of full-time realtor.
Okay.
About 17 years.
Full-time?
Full-time.
6 years and little was full time.
Okay. All right, and I have, this month will be 37 years for me full-time. So what I've seen in the business since I've got into the business back 37 years ago is a lot of changes. And in the last 5 years, I've seen more changes, I believe, than I've seen in the previous 32 years. I'm not sure if you guys are experiencing that or not, but I will share with you that if we don't react to the changes, then what's going to happen is that we're going to be looking around this room a couple of years from now, and a lot of us who do not react to those changes will not be here. You will not be in business in real estate anywhere, not just this company. You won't be in business because there's some dramatic changes going on, and some of them you can consider to be great opportunities for you, and others you might consider them to be a threat. So today what I want to do is talk a little bit about what I see as the changes that are occurring. And I speak from a reference point of being on a couple of really good committees at the state level and at the national level. At the state level, I'm a director for the California Association of Realtors for about 20 years now, and I serve on the research committee at that association. And in fact, they just created one a couple of years ago, and I was the first chair of the research committee. So I just really try to stay on top of what's going on, what the changes are, and how is that impacting us as realtors, and how is it impacting the consumers as well. And at the national level, I'm a national director for about 12 years now, and I sit on the research committee for that one as well. So I bring you information from not what I just, am making up, but this is information that's been documented by a number of different sources. And I would encourage you all to just pay more attention to what's going on around you. When I got into business, cell phones did not exist, believe it or not. There was a time before the cell phones. And when I got into business, the internet did not exist. And so a lot of changes have occurred in the way we do business today and the way consumers access information today. I remember about, 25 years ago, and I had a company that I was running in, can you reach out to those folks for me? Thank you. I remember about 25 years ago, and I did not have a cell phone because no one had cell phones, really. And I didn't even have a pager. And I remember having a client really getting upset with me because I did not have a pager. They said, you need to get a pager, we need to reach you. And this is back in the day when you wanted to call somebody and you weren't in your house or your office, you had to stop at the local gas station and hopefully get a telephone booth that wasn't so cruddy and gross that you could put the phone to your ear. You guys remember those days?
Yeah.
Well, things have changed a little bit now. And so I reluctantly got a pager because my clients forced me to. And from that point on, I was never disconnected, at least not, I was always connected to someone somehow. And I couldn't say I didn't get your page, I didn't get your call because I had one. And so there is an expectation that consumers have today for almost instant response, almost instant information or access to information. And so the realtor community overall, the organized real estate at the local level and at the state level are doing some things to help us in that regard, but I think that they're woefully behind with respect to where the consumers are at. The consumers are here, and organized real estate is back here somewhere trying to catch up. And I don't know if you guys are sensing that or not, but that's what I sense. So let me just take how many of you feel that way or how many of you feel differently? It's okay to disagree.
I would agree.
Okay? All right. So here's what I'm seeing today. I have a cell phone. I don't have a pager anymore. I have a tablet. I have mobile devices, like I'm sure all of you have mobile devices. And you may have noticed that a few years ago, the multiple listing system was kind of what we call a sacred cow, the only one that had access to real estate information as far as active and sold properties were realtors. Remember those days where we were the only ones that had that information? And then about 10 years ago, that changed, where real estate vendors, providers, MLSs, boards of realtors begin to share that information. They begin to share that information with what we call third-party aggregators. Third-party aggregators are folks who gather the information that we call the MLS, and then what they are starting to do now, and they're doing it very well, much better than real estate professionals are doing, they're packaging it in a way so that consumers have access to it, and consumers are now going to those third-party aggregators before they come to you. How many of you had a consumer reach out to you before and say, "Hey, can you tell me about this property? I saw it on Redfin." Anybody?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I saw this property on Zillow or Trulia, right? Have any of you been on a listing appointment and the consumer said, "Well, the Zestimate says my property is worth this," right? So all these things are changing. So I'm trying to sound the bell for all of us to be aware of these changes that are going on right before our very eyes. You may not know how they're all interconnected and how it's going to impact you, but I want you to know that it is going to impact you, and you need to get your head out of the sand if you have it in the sand, and you need to be aware of what those changes are, because if you are not aware, I'm afraid your consumers who you deal with, your customers, they are aware of what's going on. So here's where we are. Anybody? Most of you have heard of today's date, right? This is how many days we have remaining in this year, right here. 303 days remaining in this year, and time flies. It's hard to believe that we're already into March of 2015, isn't it? Yeah. And if you set your goals already, you may be wondering, where did the time go? And some of you may be very happy because you're on track with your goals, and hopefully all of you have goals. So let me just go back to some of these folks here. Most of you, I'm sure, have heard of Realtor.com. Remember the day when Realtor.com was the main provider of information to the consumers? We had the MLS, and we saw that as something that no one else could get but a realtor. If they want to buy a house, they have to go to me because I have the MLS. And then Realtor.com started putting that information out there. Remember that? And Realtor.com used to be the primary source of consumers going to get access to properties, but it's no longer that. It's about the third source that consumers go to get properties now. The first source is Zillow, right? And then the second source was Trulia. And did you all know that Zillow and Trulia decided to get married?
No.
Yeah, they're married. Yeah. Zillow made an offer, I think it was about $3.5 billion with the B dollars, to purchase Trulia. And this is a few months back, and recently, I think it was about a week ago, the Federal Trade Commission, who oversees whether companies are creating a monopoly or not, whether they're violating the antitrust laws or not, they looked at this transaction between Trulia and Zillow, and they said, no, it's not a monopoly. They can merge. So officially, they have been merged together. They're now one. They still operate independently, but they are owned. Zillow owns Trulia. And so a lot of us get information from Trulia. Some of us get information from Zillow. All the consumers get them from all sources. I know consumers have told me they've looked at all these different websites and even other websites to find information about real estate. Redfin is not a third-party aggregator. Redfin is actually a real estate broker's business. They're a broker, right? They have a license, but they have been able. They start out as a high-tech kind of a company, and their main focus was to how can we take this information, put it in a really technology-friendly kind of a format, so consumers can access this information, and we can generate leads, and we'll generate leads. And we have our own crew of brokers or agents that work on our staff. And what we'll do with them is that we'll feed them leads. We'll be a third-party lead generator, and we'll generate those leads and give them to them. And then later on, they decided to change their business model slightly. They said, you know what? We're going to go out and we're going to develop partnerships with local real estate agents for the areas of which these properties are that we're getting listed. And we're going to make an arrangement with them that we'll pay them a referral fee for every lead that we give them that turns out into a transaction. Anybody ever hear of Redfin and their agreements that they have? Right? Okay. So that's what they're doing. They have a broker's license. They're unlike Zillow and Trulia. Zillow and Trulia are what we call third-party aggregators. They gather this information. And whereas Redfin actually is a broker. And Redfin, will pay you a fee. And what I've noticed about Redfin, oftentimes, the leads that they sell to agents are usually leads that are for property values that are lower than the high end. You notice that? It's rare that you're going to get a Redfin lead directly that they know of that's more than a $400,000 value. They're going to try to give you more of the low end. And guess what they're doing with the higher end ones? They're keeping them for themselves. Okay, so some folks use their business model. They use Trulia in their business model. They use Zillow in their business model. They pay for leads. I know there are agents who actually work out of our company that have a subscription to these providers here, and they're getting a fee. Now, let's go on down to this company here, Google. You all know who Google is, right? Right? It's hard to access information on the web through a search engine other than going through Google. And remember the days when before Google there was a company called Yahoo?
Yahoo?
Yeah, Yahoo's still around. It's still around, but they're second class compared to Google. And anybody here Bing? Right? They're around too. So these are all folks that we get information through. These are providers. And so I want to tell you about some other things that you need to be aware of in some of these relationships. And I call this the online marketing. And online marketing is changing, and you need to be aware of those changes so that you can develop your business model around those changes. If you don't, you're going to soon be out of business. I'm sharing that with you now. That's my belief. Anybody ever hear of a company called News Corp? No. Anyone here?
Yes.
Okay. News Corp. News Corp is a multi-national, multi-billion dollar annual operation. They mostly work in the media industries, and News Corp is owned by a guy by the name of Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch is from Australia, very, very successful business guy, very shrewd business guy. Rupert Murdoch owned a lot of companies. I believe he may own, anybody hear of Fox News? Right? Anybody ever hear of the Wall Street Journal? Yeah. Okay. So News Corp is a part of that. And recently, News Corp purchased Move Inc. Anyone know who Move Inc. is? Nope. Yep. Move Inc. was a parent company that owned Realtor.com. So you all should know these things because guess what? Your customers know these things. You need to know because your customers already know, right? And so Move.com recently was purchased by News Corp. And so News Corp is in direct competition with Zillow, now Zillow Trulia, right? They're in direct competition. Move Inc. is the owner of Realtor.com. Anybody ever hear of Realtor.com? You've heard. Anyone ever hear of Listing Hub?
Yes.
Well, Listing Hub, Realtor.com, they're all the same. They're all owned by each other, okay? So Listing Hub is where the information that comes from the MLSs are stored by the properties that go on to Realtor.com. And you might say, well, who cares? Well, here's what's going on. We'll go back to Zillow, and you might ask, well, how's Zillow getting all this information? Do you remember a couple of years ago, President Obama came out to California to meet with the housing experts. Do you know who he met with? He didn't meet with California Association of Realtors. He didn't meet with the National Association of Realtors. He didn't meet with the Southland Association of Realtors. He met with Zillow. So what is that telling you? Even at the national level, at the highest level, they're going to get a lot of their information from Zillow. Now the facts are that Zillow's information comes from the MLSs, and it comes from local brokers. Local brokers are entering into agreements. They don't get paid. If I were to say, okay, I want to give all my information to Zillow, I can give it to Zillow, they're not going to pay me. Okay? They go to local MLSs, like in our area, it's called ChrisNet. Anybody heard of ChrisNet? MRMLS. MRMLS actually runs the information that we have. ChrisNet, it was a local provider years ago. The Southland Regional owned its own MLS. And about 7 or 8 years ago, it got too expensive, so they began to contract that out. They contract that service out to a company called MRMLS. They still have on your property information, you'll probably see in the corner, it'll say ChrisNet, right? But ChrisNet actually is run by MRMLS. And MRMLS is a conglomerate of local real estate associations and boards of realtors and MLSs in the Southern California region. They all meet regularly, and they come up with what the rules are for inputting your information in the MLS and so on and so forth. Okay, so why am I telling you about this? What's happening is that brokers and MLSs have been giving their information free to Trulia and to Zillow. Why? Why would they do something like that? Anybody have an idea? Yeah. Because Zillow is a publicly held company, and Zillow has hundreds of millions of dollars that they use to market and they advertise their website and they advertise properties. And so as a result, a lot of brokers and a lot of MLSs say, well, we need to get our information out to the consumers because we want the consumers to have access to this information. And let's say you're an agent and you're going for a listing. What's the high price area for you, Anna?
My area?
Yeah.
500.
500,000? 500,000? Let's say you're going on a listing appointment. It's not a referral, but it's somebody else who, you just found out they're interested in selling their home. And so you go on a listing appointment, and this other agent says, all our properties go on Zillow. And you say, well, no, we don't put our properties on Zillow. Do you think that's going to have an impact on the seller's decision about who they're going to hire?
Yes.
It is, right? And so that's why a lot of brokers, a lot of MLSs give their information to Zillow. And even though they're in the real estate industry, overall, there's a sentiment from realtors and organized real estate that we don't like Zillow. We see Zillow as a threat because Zillow is taking our information, but it's not really taking it. Realtors are giving it to them. And MLSs are giving it to them. They're not taking it, and they're giving it to them for free. And if you ever read the agreement that's between Zillow and the Realtor Association, they basically say that we can do anything we want with your information. Once we have it, it's ours. We can massage it any way we want to. We'll give you credit that we got it from you, but we're going to repackage this information and market it the way we want to. And as a result, what they're doing is they're taking that information, they're packaging it, and they're making it very appealing to consumers, and consumers are now saying, oh, I'm going to go to Zillow to find out about this property. And then what they'll do is they'll go to Greg, they say, hey, Greg, would you like to have the zip code for 91340? You know, you'll be one of 4 brokers who have that information, and we're going to give you leads every month, Greg. And Greg may say, well, are they guaranteed leads? No, but they're leads, and you have to do what you have to do with those leads. And Greg's looking at, well, you know, I don't have enough leads. You know, I'm trying to figure out how to generate more leads. I'm new in this business. You know, maybe I should be spending $300 a month to get those leads, right? And consumers are searching on their sites, and so when they have a consumer search on a property that's in Greg's zip code area, guess what? They're going to send that lead to you, Greg, and they're going to send it to a couple other brokers who have that zip code too. Now you guys got to fight about who's going to get to that consumer first and who's going to get that consumer to actually be their customer or their client, right? So that's what's going on in the industry right now. And I'm telling you that if you're not aware of this, you need to really get aware of it. Mark, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I have a question, Mel.
Mhm.
I've thought about this for a while as this has been happening, and I still can't get my mind around why the MLSs won't simply say, no, we won't give the information to Zillow. I mean, it just cuts them off.
Well, one would say so, but you can't as a group, you can't as all the MLSs in the state or the country say we're going to freeze out Zillow, because then you're going to get sued for being a monopoly and antitrust violation, right? So you can't, you can do it individually, but brokers and MLSs make a business decision. They say, well, if we don't share that information with Zillow, and our competing MLSs and competing brokers are, we're going to be disadvantaged, and as a result, we're going to lose business. Yes.
So with that in mind, so let's say Southland Regional, which is a big board,
Right.
If Southland Regional decided not to share their information,
Right.
and was to actually, LA at one point, you may remember, had their own MLS. It's called the MLS for Claw.
Mhm.
So they
still have Claw.
So they have their realtor input to the MLS, and on the back of that, they have a public access to that data, and that piece is called the MLS. So agents input, the public in LA, whenever they wanted to find a property, they would go to the MLS, which was the access to that information in Los Angeles, which I actually thought was a pretty good idea. If let's say Southland Regional did something like that, all our information goes into the database that we input, and they develop some public access to that, and then stop selling that information or stop giving that information to the third-party aggregators, consumers would have to come back to realtors.
One would think so, but here's what will happen. Zillow, who has a lot of money, would be now putting out news articles saying, you're not getting access to all the information. You know, you need to talk to your realtor. You need to talk to your board of realtors and tell them to get this information out, because they're holding the information from you. And so Zillow has a lot of money. The local boards of realtors don't have that kind of money. They can't fight, they can't fight that kind of a battle and win that kind of a battle. And so a lot of the local realtor associations have said, the horse is already out the barn. The cow's already out from behind the fence, and you can't bring it back now that you've already released it. Years ago, if they had not released that information, they'd be in a much better position. But now that the information's gotten out, you're going to have, and I'm going to share with you a couple of things that I saw recently that shows exactly what I'm saying. Okay, but that's a good point. Why are they doing it? I remember going to a broker-owner meeting. I think, Anna, you may have been there too, a year or so ago. And I think it was Roger Hance, our current president, or past president, said that, maybe we shouldn't share all this information with everybody. And then, he was making a good pitch for why we should not share this information. And then a couple big brokers stood up and said, well, I have a lot of agents. I'm in Porter Ranch, I'm in Westlake Village, and in these different markets here. And if my agents cannot say that they're marketing their properties on Zillow, they're going to be disadvantaged when they go on the listing appointment. And so I don't want to hurt my agents, so I can't agree to that. And so that's where it's at. You know, company owners are making a decision that they don't want to put themselves in a less competitive position by not sharing that information with Zillow, Trulia, and the other kinds of providers.
Could a decision like, and I get that point, could a decision like withholding be made at the CR or CRMLS, made it at the level of the organization that aggregates the information? But
Sure.
If they made it, that's all of California.
It could, but what happens is you have realtor brokers and realtor members at the California Association of Realtors and other levels of organized real estate. They are advisory members to those associations, and they are overall not going to go along with that idea. They're going to continue to go down this road that we're going down now, and so unfortunately the folks who are supposed to be protecting our interests, many of them are in cahoots with those very folks who are going against what we may think is in our best interest.
Would
Yes,
that
right.
save us?
Pardon?
If the regional is CRMLS, which is all of California, is it CRMLS?
MRMLS.
If MRMLS said, okay, we're not gonna give the information, and so let's assume that's all of California.
Right.
Now it's an even playing field. Zillow is out. That information then comes back to the realtors and all of the individual brokers, which I can understand their point. Now they don't have to be concerned about the outside competition because all of that information is now coming back to the agents.
Yeah, well,
We're shooting ourselves.
MLS is probably the largest MLS in the nation. I think we have like 60,000 subscribers. But up and down the states, there are a number of other ones. MLSs, some are owned by local boards, some are owned by the MLSs themselves, and they are all of the mindset that, our best bet in their mind is that if we could just get Zillow to pay us for getting that information instead of us giving that information out to them. They don't believe that they can all come together and not share their information with the Zillows of the world.
They're going to be out of business.
Well, that's why I'm telling you, be aware of what's going on. Yes, Rodney?
Yeah, I see where Mark is going with it, but I can't see why you won't see why it's a benefit to have the consumer have all this information, because it does cut back on a lot of our showings like we used to do in the past, getting the car, running, take them all over the place. Nowadays, these guys will come to you with a property already in mind that they want to see, and most of the time they'll buy that property. And all you got to do is write the contract. Most of the time.
Advantage and disadvantage.
Well, so I get what you're saying, but the only advantage from this model is that the consumers have access to it, right? You said they have access to it. But our boards should be able to, it's really just a matter of creating a website that the public has access to, and they still are getting that information. It's just that we're not dismantling our own business from the inside out.
Right.
Right now this is just a matter of time. It's like being on the runway. You're taking parts of the airplane. You're just throwing them off. At some point, it's not going to be enough airplane left.
But with these guys, we're able to pick up buyers from all over the world, pretty much, because of their buying strength. I think so.
Well, let me just go back, and William had his hand up, so I got to give William an opportunity, and I'll come back to you. Yes, William.
Well, when we're ready to discuss how to use these things to our own advantage, then I have something to say.
Okay. All right, Keith, are you going to be a part of this? Or?
And then listening, in my opinion,
You got an answer.
there's definitely a solution to it.
There's what?
If our solution, if our association can create a platform that's just as good as Zillow, that's the way I see it. And if you can't do that, forget about it. Everybody's going to use Zillow.
Well, the reality is that local associations don't have the kind of resources, dollars,
Yeah.
that a private company like Zillow has. Zillow is spending hundreds of millions of dollars to do this marketing.
Absolutely.
Our association, in order for them to do that, they're going to have to raise fees. The moment they raise the fees, the members say, hey, why are you raising my fees? And so there's no way to compete with that. Zillow can go on to the open market, to Wall Street, and sell stocks and raise money to do what they're doing. And Zillow is not really making a profit, but they're making a lot of revenue and they're gaining market share. And eventually, I'll tell you what my belief is that they're going to do, but we're going to move on and go into another piece first, okay? All right. All right, so the battle has begun, Zillow and Trulia merger, and how will that change consumers and the way they access information? I believe that there is some value that comes from Zillow, Trulia, and the other kinds of companies. One of them is what Rodney has stated. That is, a lot of times the consumers will search those sites first, and then when they come to you, they've already narrowed it down to the property that they'd like to see. However, and then so it makes it easier for you now to write an offer with that client, right? Because they've narrowed it down. Instead of looking at 10 properties with you, they've narrowed it down to 1 or 2 properties. Does that make sense?
But sometimes the properties are already being sold.
Exactly.
And then that they come to you with a property that is already done, and you're giving them information, sometimes they feel like you're not giving them the right information.
That's right. That's right, and that's one of the biggest concerns that has been outlined regarding Zillow, is that their information is not accurate. They don't have rules. If Zillow was a broker like we are, an agent, they'd have to abide by the MLS rules. The MLS rules say within 3 days, business days, you have to take that property off as showing active. You have to show it as pending, on hold, withdrawn, sold, or whatever. Zillow doesn't have to play by those rules. So Zillow can play by the rules that they created, which is, we'll put this information out here. Yeah, that property is no longer available, but you know what, we'll take it down next month, right? And so what their goal is to generate leads. And when they have good properties that generate leads, then it's kind of a false thing that they do. However, they're selling those leads to the realtors, and some of those consumers access that information, and when you show them the information, they say, well, how come I don't see this? And then you have to go through the extra effort of saying, look, that one's pending. That one is sold. That one's no longer on the market. So it makes our job a little more complicated at times, and so Zillow does not have the accuracy. So what the realtors have been pushing for, I would say the last 2 years, is accuracy. But consumers are not buying it. They know Zillow is not as accurate, but they like the way Zillow and Trulia package that information. They like it, and so that's why they keep going there, and Zillow is aware of that. And what I'm saying is that, we may not like it, but this is just a reality of where consumers are, and consumers are driving this car. It's not us. It's them. Yes, Greg.
Doesn't that give you a good idea, although it may be unrealistic price, or something, at least if someone's coming to you and you're like, this is the ideal house that I want.
Right.
So you can kind of do a comp, and you can give them an idea of what they're looking for. You don't really have to ask these questions.
Right.
Their idea is right there, and you can work with it yourself.
Yeah.
Right. It reduces the search time,
Yeah.
and it narrows it down to the properties that these clients are particularly interested in. And so Zillow has done a masterful job of taking the information, because they get the same information we got. We get it first. But they get it within like 15 minutes after we get it, right? There's a feed that goes to them, but we actually get it first. But they're very good at having millions of dollars of marketing folks, brilliant minds, who sit around and they figure out, how can we appeal to this consumer? How can we get them to want to buy a house like this? And even though the house like this is no longer available, it will cause that consumer to reach out to them and say, give us more information on this property. And when they say that, that's when Greg or Mark or anyone who has a subscription to these companies will then get that lead, and then it's up to you to figure out how to get this client to come into you and make him your client and not just a prospect. Yes?
What I think it is, I'm not sure if it's good or bad, but I just think that, those vendors are doing a good job in educating the consumer.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, to me, it's like telling us, like every time we have a phone call, we don't take the time to educate our own clients,
Right.
clients.
Right.
So they're doing it for us, so they basically go into those, to those companies, and I just feel like, every time we get a lead, we should just be giving the whole information, explaining what the loan is all about, what they're getting into it and everything. So just kind of give them, you know, a little bit of education so they can feel it and they can see, oh, well, she's really giving me information that I really need. I should work with that person.
Well, very well, and I'm glad you shared that, and that's what I want us to see. You know, you can fight this, you can think it's unfair, or whatever the opinions you may have about it, but the reality is this is what it is now, and you can fight it, but you're not going to win the battle. So what do? You try to figure out, well, how can I position myself as a realtor and show them that there's added value, as Mark shared with me the other day. What is the value proposition? What is the added value that I'm bringing to this consumer? And so just as Anna has said, now you have the opportunity. They've done a lot of the screening work, as Greg said, and Anna said, well, why don't we now show them how we are adding value to them working with us? So I'm not telling you this to make you mad or to get you to fight this. I'm just telling you this to get you to open up your eyes and your ears to what's going on around you and realize that if you don't do something about it, you're going to be out of business very soon. Okay, that's what this is all about. This is what I call a wake-up call. You want to hear something really interesting? Yes, Keith.
There's actually other properties on there too, where I don't know if it's a brokerage, but they have an agent. From what I understand is
Who's they? Zillow?
Zillow, correct? Yes. Where I guess they charge a flat fee. What happened was my client found two properties that weren't on our MLS.
Mm-hmm.
One was a for sale by owner.
Mm-hmm.
I get it. There was another property that was listed on Zillow. So when I called, they definitely had an agent, but I think they don't charge like a commission. She called it an exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be kind of neat to kind of, in exchange, we should be able to get that data too as well, so we don't have to use two separate platforms. At least we're aware of it.
Well, let me see if I can speak to that. Zillow is a publicly traded company. They now own Trulia, so now they're bigger than they were, right? Zillow, as I said, they don't play by the rules that the realtors play by. They don't have code of ethics. They don't have all these different things that they do. They are just trying to provide information to consumers to generate leads, to generate a profit for themselves, right? So that's how they operate. And so Realtor.com does not put for sale by owners on their websites. Zillow does. Up until about 2 years ago, Realtor.com did not put rentals on their website. As a member of the board of directors, I was asked to fly back to Chicago 2 years ago for a specially called meeting of all the directors at the National Association to look at what was going on between Zillow and Realtor.com and how can we begin to compete before we get shut out of business. Because Zillow, at that time, Realtor.com did not allow rentals. Now they do. Before they did not. And so there was a discussion, should Realtor.com allow for sale by owners? And the members voted no, they should not, because we want the for sale by owner to come to us, a realtor. Now there are other brokers, there's all kinds of business models. There's a broker that's based out in, I think, Colorado, who has a flat fee platform. And what they're saying is that you come to us, we'll charge you $500, we'll charge you $1,000, or we'll charge you 1%, or whatever their strategy happens to be, and we'll give you access to that information. And so they're putting their information on Zillow now too. So there's a lot of threats coming at us at different venues, and we have to make sure that we can show the consumer that we're providing and adding value to the relationship they have with us. We have a lot of good things that we do that folks who are just trying to buy as a for sale by owner, they don't have all that access. They don't have all the forms, but that's not to say Zillow won't create their own form soon, right? They don't have all the disclosures. They don't have the code of ethics. You know, if we do something unscrupulous and unethical, guess what? We can get railed and nailed out, right? Folks who are with these kind of companies who are real estate licensees, not a member of organized real estate, but they just have a real estate license. And in the state of California, as long as you have a license and you hang your license with the broker, you don't have to belong to any local association of realtors, nor do you have to be subject to any grievance or hearings. So you're just like a lone ranger doing your own thing and not have to be accountable to any of the rules. So Zillow has a good thing in that they don't have to take it off the MLS because they don't have it on the MLS. They just have their own platform, right? And whereas if you and I don't take it off the MLS, guess what? We're going to get a notice, right? I've gotten them. Anybody get notice before saying, hey, you need to take that down? Your information's not accurate, right? This is what's going on. So here's something that's interesting. A few weeks ago, the CEO of Zillow said that the information that they get from ListHub, and remember ListHub is owned by what? Realtor.com, right? Okay? The information that Zillow has been getting from ListHub in April of this year is going to be cut off. So ListHub has said, we're not going to give you information anymore for properties that we have on our system. You have to get it from some other source. So the guy from Zillow says, well, we don't care. That information is not accurate anyhow. That's what they said. And then there was a merger of Trulia and Zillow. Once that merger was approved, ListHub said, you know what? In our agreement, we can abandon this relationship we have with you, Zillow, to give you information for properties that we have in our system. And so we're going to stop giving you that information. Guess what? You see this Zillow group files for a restraining order against ListHub? Even though they were saying that we don't need your information, because ListHub said immediately we're going to stop sharing that information. We're not going to wait until April. The deal between Zillow and ListHub, which remember they were two separate companies, Zillow, Trulia, two separate companies. The deal between Zillow and ListHub was to expire in April of 2015, where ListHub said we're not going to give you this information anymore. The agreement between ListHub and Trulia had a stipulation that said that if you change ownerships, we can stop giving you that information. Well, guess what? They changed ownership, and ListHub says, okay, since we already have terms in the agreement that says that we can disavow or disconnect ourselves from you, we're going to stop giving you that information. And guess what? You know what a restraining order is, right? Basically, Trulia said, no, you can't do that. You can't do that because it's causing harm to the consumers. Even though a week earlier they said, we don't care about your information. They do care about the information, they do, but they didn't like it done on the terms that Listing Hub wanted to do it. Listing Hub said, we're cutting you off right now. We're not going to give you a chance to develop your full platform. We're not going to give you a chance to go out with all those brokers and all those MLSs all throughout the nation to get that information. I'll tell you, as soon as this merger occurred with Trulia and Zillow, I started getting phone calls from Zillow. Hey, you need to, can you call us back? We can position you on Zillow. We can get your information on Zillow. In fact, we'll give it to you. You won't no fee. You can get all your information all updated. So they know that they need this information. They know they need it, but they had not consolidated enough of MLSs and local brokers yet, so it would be seamless in their transition. They figured by April it would be seamless, but now they weren't quite ready for it. Yes, Mark?
I just want to be sure I'm clear. So for Zillow and Trulia, their information, the feed that they get from the MLS is from ListHub, so it goes from the MLSs to ListHub, and then ListHub is what distributes it out to these guys?
Right, and then also, that's one way they get it. The other way is go directly to Mel Wilson and Associates and say, Mel, we'd like to have all your listings. Or go to CRMLS. CRMLS, we'd like to have all your listings. So they're getting it from multiple different sources. ListHub was just one of those sources. Okay? All right, so any comments? Yes, Keith?
To me personally, outside of Zillow and Trulia, the company that I think is probably a big threat would be Red. They have a similar platform. They have their own realtors within that company. That's just my opinion.
Well, that's a good opinion. It's an opinion that I think I would take what your opinion is on Redfin and the threat that they have. Redfin is just a small player in this big picture. If you look at the inventory of Redfin, they don't have as much inventory of Zillow by any stretch of the imagination. They don't. But what they do have is a broker's license.
Brokers, yeah.
Right.
Platform, too.
Well, they have a great platform. They have a great platform. But they have a broker's license. They are a broker, just like we're brokers. Zillow's not.
That's why they feel threat. Because they have a license.
They have a license. So let me go through this, and I'm going to tell you a threat that you need to be concerned with. Zillow and Yahoo. Did you know that Zillow and Yahoo has an exclusive agreement? So information from Zillow goes to Yahoo, and Yahoo to Zillow. So all these folks, they're cutting deals with all these other folks out there, all these search engines. And I'm surprised that Google's not in it yet. Just can you imagine what would happen if Google got in the deal?
Oh, yeah.
What's the matter of time, Mr. Wilson?
What does that mean, man?
What does what mean?
Where it says Zillow and has an exclusive with Yahoo, does that mean like if a person goes to Yahoo and does a search for a house for sale, it will be a property that's listed on Zillow?
Right, and Zillow will send that lead to them, or they'll send the lead back this way. So let's say Yahoo has an agreement to get information that put it on the MLS, or not on the MLS, but put it out in the public domain, and a lead comes from there, it goes back to Zillow. Zillow then sends it out to you and sells you that lead. So they're in relationship with each other. They're sharing information. Now, News Corp, just so you know the role that News Corp is playing, News Corp purchased Move for about, I want to say $950 million. So they purchased Realtor.com for $950. But remember I said Zillow bought Trulia for $3.5 billion, less than $1 billion, right? So there's, just look at the dollars. So News Corp is huge. What News Corp is talking about doing is taking this information from Realtor.com, which they get from ListHub, and they want to create their own kind of platform for which they're using the Realtor brand. So the part of the deal that the Realtor Association made with Realtor.com is that you have to continue to use the Realtor brand. In other words, the label that says Realtor, right? However, at some point, News Corp may decide, you know what, that Realtor brand is not bringing me any customers. It's not generating any extra leads for me. And so we don't know how long this News Corp marriage will go with Move, right? And ListHub, we're not sure how much longer that will sustain itself, because at the end of the day, these companies are all in it for the money. That's what they're in it for. All right, so I think it was about a week ago, Zillow unveiled a new national television spot, and they're spending millions and millions of dollars to generate leads, to make people feel good about the properties that they have on their system, so they can generate more and more leads. All right, so let me just tell you what I think the biggest threat is. And it's something that Keith alluded to. Here's the big threat. I understand the concern that we all have. Why are realtors putting themselves in a position to destroy themselves? Why are they giving this information to Zillow? You know, it wasn't long ago, I would say about 8 years ago, Zillow was like a non-player. They would be at all the conventions. I go to the expos for the realtors, for the state expo, the national expo. Zillow had a nice little small booth there. Now they got a huge area that they control for just marketing their information and showing realtors how they can generate more leads. And realtors, the bottom line for most realtors is their biggest challenge is getting more leads. Would you agree? Getting more people that want to buy and sell their homes. And so Zillow came up with this estimate, and even though it's not the most reliable one, it's the talk of the town. When you go on a listing appointment, a lot of your savvy consumers are going to say, you know, this estimate said my property is worth this. And even though this estimate has not gone in to take a look at the condition of that property, has not looked at, you know, what was added on to it, but it's still information that consumers are using to determine whether they think their property is worth X or Y. So here's what I think the biggest threat is. I think the biggest threat is this business model. This business model of Redfin, where I don't think Redfin is the biggest threat. I think their business model is. And so what I'm saying is, here's what I think is going to happen. I think that the Southland Regional Association of Realtors, who I was a member since, for 37 years, who I was the president over almost 20 years ago, and I still work with them. I have relationships with them. A lot of the members on the board of directors are my friends, and so on and so forth. But what I'm saying is that association and all the local associations, and as well as the state and the national associations, are putting themselves out of business. Here's what's happening. Anybody remember in December, we got a billing notice saying that your dues are due in December? Anybody remember that? And how many of you were surprised? I was surprised because I normally get my notice in December saying I have until January 31 the next year to pay my bill. Weren't you surprised that if you didn't pay your bill in December that you were going to get cut off? So behavior like that makes realtors realize, well, are they really looking after me? Why would they give me a bill when I'm trying to save money for Christmas and Hanukkah, right? Why would they give me a bill when I just have to pay my property taxes? Why would they give me a bill when I'm trying to get year-end ready for next year? Why would they send me a bill without even giving me notice that this bill was coming? So it's decisions that our local boards make that shows insensitivity to the members. And so at some point, the members are going to say, well, why do I have to be a member of you? I don't have to get MLS from you anymore, right?
Yeah.
And so they may say, well, you need our forms, California Association of Realtors, or you need zip forms. What's stopping Zillow and some other company, it could be a company that doesn't even exist right now, coming out with their own set of forms, right? What's stopping them from doing that? So you're going to have the Wild Wild West with realtors who are not really realtors, they're licensees who don't belong to the local association of realtors, don't really need them because they realize that what value am I getting? I think you get a lot of value out of it, frankly. I can make an argument for a lot of good values you're getting, but some of the insensitive kind of behaviors that they are exhibiting really shows that you're not as sensitive to me as a member as you ought to be. And what happens is the board of realtors, board of directors, are the ones that make these decisions. And so if you think that things should change, then you guys need to think about getting on the board of directors, where you can have a say-so in how things are happening, because what happens is a lot of us get mad, we complain, but we're too busy. We don't want to get involved with the board of realtors. We don't want to do all this stuff. That's politics. We don't want to do that. And as a result, guess what? The people who really don't care about doing business anymore, maybe they've already made their money, maybe their family made money before, maybe, their wife makes the money and they're just doing this part-time, maybe the husband makes money, and so this is not their full-time gig, right? And so they're in there making these decisions that benefits them and not benefiting the members as a whole, right? I'll give you another example. It wasn't that long ago, about 2 years ago, the National Association of Realtors sent out a instruction to all the state associations, which came down to the local association. They said, look, we're losing members. The economy is tough. We need more members. And we believe that there are a lot of folks who are accessing information. Really? Sorry.
I'm sorry.
A lot of folks are accessing information, but they're not paying their fair share. And so what they started doing, the National Association went to all the state associations. They said, here's the way it's going to work. You state associations have directors. You want to be a director at the national level. Maybe you want to run up the ladder and be president of CER one day, or maybe you want to be chair of a committee at CER, or maybe you want to be on the board of directors for the national, or maybe you want to be president of NAR one day. So that's what they're saying, right? That's the reality. And so they're saying, okay, Southland Regional, California Association of Realtors, what we're going to do, we're going to enforce this rule that we've had on the books for all this time, but we've never enforced it. And here's the rule. We're going to look at your state agency that governs real estate licensees. We're going to look at that roster at the CalVRE. And we're going to make sure that that roster at CalVRE of the agents that are on Mel Wilson's roster at the local level are members of the Southland Regional, right? And if we find that you're not in compliance with members at the local real estate office who are not paid dues members at the local association. Because remember, the local association, once you pay your dues at the local, you also have to pay your dues at the state and at the national. They're all tied together, right? So what they said was, here's what we're going to do. We're going to pass this rule that if you do not make sure your members on that state roster are also paid at the local level, we're going to kick you off all the committees at CAR, and we're going to kick you off all the committees at NER. So all those folks who are trying to move up the ladder at CAR and NER, they're feeling the pressure. Wait a minute. I want to be president-elect of CAR. I want to be the treasurer. I want to be this. I want to be that, right? I want to be a committee chair of MLS. And so what these folks are saying is that, wait a minute here. I don't want to jeopardize my career opportunity because I'm trying to move up this ladder. And so CAR said, another thing we're going to do is we're going to cut off all your zip forms. And not only are we going to cut off the zip form for that agent that's not a member, but that whole company. So let's say, for example, Mel Wilson and Associates had 40 agents. And out of that 40, maybe 7 or 8 of them are on the state roster as well as the local in my roster, right? But they're not paid at Southland Regional. So they're going to send out a notice to Mel. Mel, here's the deal. Either you pay for their dues at Southland Regional, or we're going to cut off the MLS and zip form for your whole office. That's what's going on.
Is that recently?
That happened about a year ago. And so a lot of folks who are not paid, and a lot of folks have been struggling over the last 5 years. Would you agree? A lot of realtors have been struggling. So they couldn't pay their dues. And so they were just kind of, coming to meetings and doing their thing, but not paying their dues. And maybe they'll have a friend that will let them show a property, or maybe they'll do an open house for a friend, or maybe they'll be a showing agent and do these kind of things, but they didn't pay their membership dues. Guess what? You can't be on the roster anymore. You can't be on our local roster, because the risk that I take is that if Marcel, my son, who was on my roster at the state level, didn't pay his dues because he doesn't even do real estate anymore, if I take the risk of keeping him on my roster, Anna's going to be really mad at me, because Anna's going to go in one day and try to get access to zip forms. Man, what's going on with my zip forms? I got to write an offer right now. I got a listing appointment. And Anna won't be able to go on. So you think Anna's going to like me? No. She's not going to. Even though she loves me, she won't like me right now. Yes, Mark.
I just want to make sure I understand. I think I've missed a piece. Because when the dues are paid locally, that covers SAR, CAR, and NAR.
Right.
How does one wind up at the state level on the roster with no dues being paid at the local level? Because we pay at the local, and then it gets.
Well, it's not about an association. It's Cal BRE. Cal BRE, you pay every 4 years. You renew your license, right? Every 4 years you renew your license. So maybe 3 years ago you renewed your license, so your license is still good. But maybe because you're not active in real estate, you haven't paid your local dues. But maybe you still go to the office. Maybe you still write offers. Maybe somebody says, hey, Mel, can you do my open house for me? See, so that's what they're doing. They're enforcing it. So what I'm saying is all these kinds of behaviors that's coming down from the national level, from the state level, and from the local level is getting people irritated. And they're saying, you know what? I have a friend of mine, she calls them the mafia. That's the mafia. That's how they treat people, right? And so as a result, what's happening is that I believe the biggest threat is a company like Redfin, but not that they're going to be the threat. I think what's to stop Zillow from becoming a Redfin? What's to stop Zillow from getting a real estate broker's license? And you may say, well, maybe they don't have to abide by all the rules and the MLS rules. Yeah, well, maybe what they'll do is they'll get a parent company. They'll be the parent company. They get another company that's a brokerage, right? And so Zillow is getting all this information over here, and then they start up another company to call, maybe it'll be called Zillfin or TrueZill. We'll call them TrueZill. They'll start a brokerage company called TrueZill. They'll generate all these leads, right? And what's to stop them from saying, you know what? we'll list your house for a 1%. And we'll put it on Zillow, and we'll get all the consumers to come. And what's to stop them from doing that, right? So I think that that's a huge threat. And what's to stop them from saying, you know what, why do you want to belong to the Southland Regional CAR? Come to us. You know what, we're not that political. We just want to help you make money. And we'll show you how to make money. Forget about all this political stuff at the local level, you know. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think that at the local level, at the national, at the state level, what's going to happen is that the local association, the state and the national are going to get so comfortable thinking that, oh, they're our members and they have to go to us. Well, pretty soon, they're not going to have to go to us. They can go to Zillow.
Do we have a solution for that?
You know what? I think the only solution I can think of is get involved at the local level, go on the board of directors, be one of the policymakers, and start articulating your voice about, hey, this is not right. We think you need to be aware. We think you need to be more sensitive to our members. To me, to do what they did in December, to give everybody a bill without even giving them a notice, and for the 37 years I've been a member, I always paid my dues by January 30th. And a lot of times, because I wanted a tax write-off, I paid them by December 31st, right? But that was my option. All of a sudden, I don't have that option anymore. I'm out of business. People are very unhappy with that kind of behavior. And that's just one example of how things are going down. And so I believe that what's happening is that organized real estate really is not always looking out for its members first. They're looking out for, well, who can get the next award, who can get this president or that president. Do you hear what I'm saying? And I'm saying this to give you guys a heads up. So what's the solution, Anna says? I think the solution is this. Realize, do more research, read about what's going on, find out what consumers want, and give them what they want. That's the solution. Find out what the consumers want, give them what they want. That's what Zillow's doing. Zillow is not creating something, they're just doing what consumers want them to do.
Yeah, but if you say that the threat is like, the threat is like, if they do it for 1%, like Mike Clifford used to do it, right?
He still does?
He still does, but he goes by a menu. Okay,
Right.
I'll do this, I'll charge only 1%, but if you want more service, then I'll charge you more, and it goes, and the people, if they really don't have a knowledge of what they're doing, they end up paying this 5% or 6%.
Right.
So I don't know, if, like you said, if, these companies come with a 1%, 2%, it's a big competition right there.
Well, there are a lot of companies that provide flat fees. There are companies that are providing 1% or 2%. And at the end of the day, our job is to show the consumers what value we bring to them. When I go on a listing appointment, I'm asking for 6% unless it's a probate, right? If it's a past client that I've done multiple transactions with them, I'll change my fee and charge them only 5%. That's my particular business model. That's what I do. That's my practice, right? However, so I believe I'm worth it. So I have to just show the consumer why I'm worth it. As far as the buyers should not care, because up until now, the seller pays for the fee. And so what you let the buyers know is that it doesn't really matter. And I tell my buyers when I meet with them for the first time buyer, I say, look, you don't pay me a fee. Maybe you pay me an administrative fee, $350, whatever, that's it. You don't have to pay me the broker's fee, the seller's paying for you. And they're relieved because most of them come in there thinking, well, how much do you get paid? And how much do I have to pay you? And I tell them, well, you know what? You just pay me my administrative fee, and that's all I'm charging you. The rest of it's being paid for by the seller. Yes, William.
Okay, so I'm going to change topic since we're starting to run late.
You've already ran late.
I accept things when they come. When Realtor.com started publishing all our MLS, I have to admit initially I felt bad because, like Mr. Wilson said, it used to be our own secret little book that we had control over. But the truth of the matter is it does not change who we are, and as Mr. Wilson said, the value that we offer to our customers. And this is our number one job, is selling ourselves to the customers. And as you mentioned before, you get that call, you're selling yourself by giving them that education, that information. Now, I'm going to give you some examples. 3 years ago, we had a new pastor come into our church. We went out, we looked at houses because we were in the middle of the mortgage mess. He couldn't get a mortgage until he was on the job for a year, so he had to go rent a place for a year. Well, he found his house on Zillow. And he says, William, this house came up on Zillow and our lease is up in 2 months. I want to buy it. Let's go look at it. We went, we looked at it, we bought it, and now that house is coming back on the market in just a couple of weeks here. So that, how it helped. Now, the other thing is my listing on Reseda Boulevard. The Z estimate was always less than what we were asking, and it'd go up and down. And every time it went up and down, the seller would call me because it was always lower than what we were asking. Made it easy for me to ask for reductions. Okay, so we need to know what it says on any given point in time when they come in. When the buyers are coming into Valley Vista at the open house, for example, and I'm sitting here, and this is, they're behind. I put this back on the market last Thursday, and it's still not up on Zillow yet as an active listing. But Zillow says the Z estimate is $737,000. So I know the buyers will probably have looked at Zillow when they go up to the house, and I'm asking $665. And so when they come in and tell me it needs a lot of work, I says, yeah, but Zillow says it's $737. You know, so you got $40,000, $50,000 to spend to make it worth what Zillow says it's worth. So, and again, this is, you know, you can use it both ways. In other words, the information's out there, know what the consumer's looking at, and use it to your own advantage.
But that's still on the buyer's side.
Listen, you know, we are not, the sellers are not going into Zillow unless they're ready to list their house and they want to do a little comparison. Our job is to be out there meeting those sellers before they get to that point. Zillow and these things like this, yeah, they might bring us in buyers, but they're not going to bring us in those staple sellers.
Well, I don't know that I agree with all of that, because I think that Zillow is going to start doing that.
You think it will?
What's to stop them? I mean, they have more money than anybody else.
I'm just saying is we need to get to them before they get.
Well, I think the point that you make that I would like to drive home is that know what's going on.
Yeah.
Know what's going on so that you can position yourself to provide the best service you can for the sellers and for the buyers. You can fight this all day long, but you're not going to change it by yourself. You can incrementally change things at the local level at your association of realtors, and hopefully when you get in a state level, at the national level, you can make some change and change the dialogue. But unfortunately, there's so many folks who are at the policy level at the organized real estate, they're not thinking about what's in the best interest of the members. They're thinking about what's in the best interest of them, their career, what they're doing. And I hate to say it, but that's just the reality that I've seen, right? And I've been a part of the organized real estate for a long, long time. And I'm just saying, be aware of what's happening with these changes in our industry. Don't be like some of the companies that we once knew to be the big giants. Remember years ago, IBM. Big giant, right? Everybody went to IBM. And now IBM is a player still, but they're not a major player anymore, right? They're not. Apple is probably the richest company in the world right now. And they didn't exist 20 years ago, right? 25 years ago. So just see things change, and our industry is changing. And if you're prepared to change with it, but keep your core values of providing good service, being honest, ethical, and doing what you say you're going to do, you'll still have a business. Yeah. But you have to be aware of what your competition is doing and what other folks are doing in order for you to be very successful in this business today. Yes, Keith?
No, I think that's really it. I mean, you just be so really darn good at what you do. None of this stuff is going to matter. That's how I see it. That's why I'm kind of like, but I agree with you. You definitely have to be aware of all these things so we can address them, to at least let them know that, look.
You're aware.
Right.
You're aware. But I think it will matter. I think overall what's going to happen is commissions are going to be driven down to a lower level than they are now, because there will be so many other options for consumers to go to. They can go like, you know, a menu of services. And maybe you need to think about that too at some point, is when you're in an appointment and they're saying, well, so-and-so is only charging me this. And you say, okay, what service do you want me to not offer you? I can do something with you, but not at that price. Yeah. And that's what people do, right? You go to a restaurant and you want a main course, but you want dessert too. Okay, you got to pay more for that dessert, right? Yes, William.
Establish a net price for the listing.
That's one other option.
Meaning you can get as much as you can over that net price for your.
Well, there's a risk at that, you know. They can come back at you and saying, what is your fiduciary duty? Is your fiduciary
Okay, for listing at a net price, it says, okay, now I'm just going to add my commission onto this.